Colonel Robert Michael Luckey, United States Army, Vietnam. Colonel Luckey served 30 years in the military, just a great man. I had the opportunity to meet him when I was in Brenham, Texas in 2010. It was February 16th I interviewed him in Brenham. He's featured in my film Lest They Be Forgotten Texas, which was premiered in Brenham, Texas on Veterans Day in 2010. And there were 2,000 people there. I was in Atlanta, Texas. I couldn't make it. I had another commitment to interview veterans in Atlanta, Texas, but it was a great premiere. This is one of the films that I have available on my website, larrycapetto.com, if you want to see that film. But Colonel Luckey is in this film. He went into the military in 1956, born in 1933, so he's one of the older Vietnam veterans. Again, 30 years in the military. He served in the United States Army. He was a troop commander, 2 tours in Vietnam, 66 and 67, went back in 71, was under 2 Corps in Vietnam. And he was an Army paratrooper and a Green Beret Reserve officer, folks. So this man was very versatile, did many things, many commendations, and we lost him in 2019 at the age of 86. So when I interviewed him, he was in his late 70s. But I'm just really happy to share his story with you today. Another perspective of Vietnam through his eyes and ears. I want to thank Michael and Darlene Sarofsky. You've heard their name mentioned because they've helped sponsor other veteran interviews of mine, and I'm just so grateful for you guys. You are such a blessing to my life. I appreciate you so much. And I know you want a platoon of men, maybe a company of men, Michael, maybe even more than that, but you've been such a blessing. Look forward to working with you this year. So just wanted to thank you again, guys. This is a great story. My last story was Randy Sandy. Remember Randy Sandy, the guy who made the shadow boxes? He folded 17,000 flags. If you haven't watched the video, watch it. And this was his way of giving back to our troops and those that were fallen in battle. I have one of these here. I wanted to show this in my last video and I failed to do so. This is one of those shadow boxes, and I looked under here, Randy Sandy, Bill and Claire, Mary Claire. Check it out. This is number 2072. He had them numbered, and he did about 17,000 of them. So I got this when I interviewed him in Independence, Missouri, back in 2010. So, okay, folks, I'm going to Arizona at the end of this month and going to interview Vietnam veterans. I've got a World War II veteran down there too. That's where I started my work 21 years ago. So it's like coming home. First loved my work. So I've got about 8 or 10 veterans lined up. I'm going to revisit with Jerry McNally, who has the most views of any video that I have on this channel other than the film Vietnam Remembered. Jerry's approaching 1 million views on his story. So if you haven't watched Jerry McNally's interview, do a search and find it. It's awesome. It's powerful. And Ed Masterson. I'm going to visit with Ed and his wife, Sharon, down in Arizona when I'm there. So hopefully the temperature is going to be warmer there. But it's going to be very reminiscent of the time I spent there when I first started my work 21 years ago. So, folks, if you'd like to help me with this endeavor, I would really appreciate it. I would encourage you to reach out, maybe help me with going down there with the resources I need to do this work. I trust God, and I just thank you for your help, those of you that are stepping forward to help me with this venture. So there's information in the video description of every one of my videos, in the comment section of every video, and on my website, larrycapetto.com. You can click on donate, and I greatly appreciate it. So Project Vietnam Remembered 2024, it's coming. Voices of History Radio is going strong. Over 50 countries have tuned into my radio station. I'm hoping to keep it going. We're coming up on my 1-year anniversary in March. And if you haven't tuned into Voices of History Radio, it's a free app on either App Store, or you can go to larrycapetto.com. On my home page is the player. You just hit play. You can listen day and night. I especially reach out to truck drivers and students in schools. We need to get this history in their hands, living history in the palm of their hands. I've got to go, folks. I apologize for the long introduction. I want to get into Colonel Luckey's story here for you. Thank you for subscribing to this channel, and share it with others. Share this video with others, and look for the next broadcast coming soon. God bless you.
I went on active duty in I was commissioned in ROTC from the University of Washington in 1955. I went on active duty then in 1956 for 6 months. At that time they had too many officers, so we did a 6-month tour of duty, and then I returned to the U.S. Army Reserve in Seattle. And then in 1964 I went back on active duty from a Special Forces Reserve unit in Seattle and remained on active duty until 1986 when I retired.
So when were you deployed to Vietnam?
I was deployed to Vietnam first time in 1966-67, and then in the second time in 1971. Both times I was in 2 Corps, which is up in the highlands, I was in the mountains of the Republic of South Vietnam.
Sorry, you're in the Army?
Yes,
okay.
Army.
Are you a captain, you said?
I was a captain the first time and a major the second time, yes.
So the 66, 67 tour, you were a captain?
Yes.
Tell me what you did. What were you in charge of, and what were your responsibilities?
Because I had a television and broadcasting journalism background, the Army sent me to Armed Forces Radio Television, and I commanded one of the 8 upcountry TV television stations that were then put into Vietnam in various parts of the country where there were heavy troop concentrations. Mine was on top of a mountain called Dragon Mountain. I was a troop commander and station commander for the television station, and also for a contingent of signal people that belonged to the 4th Infantry Division Signal Battalion, which I had under my wing, as it were, there on the mountain.
Did you ever get out in combat anywhere or anything like that?
I had some combat exposure, yes, very limited, nothing like the grunts in the 4th Infantry Division. That occurred mostly when I was the second time when I was advisor to the South Vietnamese, what they call the regional force and popular forces in Dalot, in that area in 2 Corps. Yes.
That picture was taken?
The picture, no, both pictures that you have were taken when I was then in the first tour, okay, in Vietnam.
Great. So what was maybe the most difficult task you had to do during that tour? What was the most difficult thing you had to do?
Probably getting, in a personal basis, probably getting used to the fact that there were people there who wanted to kill me. I think it's every red-blooded American man, boy, woman, or what have you, who suddenly gets into a combat environment, a shooting environment, which I was only in spasmodically in both tours, but enough to know that it ain't no fun. Adjusting to that and having to give orders to young men to put themselves in harm's way occasionally, either in an offensive or a defensive configuration.
Which tour was more difficult, the first one or the second?
Second one, when I was an advisor, because the first tour we were static on top of a mountain, and although we had numerous hot times, at least we were always in one place. In Dalot, in the upcountry, the second time, we were out in the field a lot with the RF and PF in the various districts. And therefore I did a lot of helicopter flying there and resupply missions, that sort of thing. I was a logistics advisor, but it was more of an operational assignment.
So you're flying on the Huey helicopters?
Yes, yes.
Tell me, I know the answer, but for the sake of what we're doing, tell me the purpose of the Huey in Vietnam and how important it was.
Well, the Huey in Vietnam, of course, initially was probably, if you saw the movie, we were soldiers once, the Air Cav, the first Air Cav, used it as a troop airlift vehicle. To get troops into combat very quickly, the idea of a mobile infantry force, as it were. However, then, of course, as the conflict settled in, the Huey became the all-purpose workhorse. We ferried Vietnamese troops, we ferried supplies, we resupplied by air, we evacuated, if you will, corpses, dead bodies. We did a lot of administrative and logistical work beyond the basic mission of initial troop airlifts.
My film on Vietnam Remembered, Um, when it first comes on, you don't see anything. All you hear is in the background the Huey coming in.
Yes.
You just kind of have. I know how important that sound has been to the Vietnam veterans, and even today as they
Yes.
hear a helicopter. But so I kind of focused on the Air Mobile Division,
Yes.
and of course I told a lot of things, but. I'm fascinated by the Hueys and even the landing crafts that took soldiers into Omaha Beach and Iwo Jima during World War II. So the mode of transportation. But you were around a lot of the troops. What kind of mindset does it take to go to war and to fight for your country? And in Vietnam, you know, the fact that it was a quote an unpopular war. What type of morale problems did you see, and how did the troops stay motivated?
It was not a popular war, as you said. There was a lot of questioning it, and there were a lot of the mindset was, what the hell am I doing here? In some occasions, not always. The morale, I think, depended on the unit you were in and the type of combat exposure you had. It was up to, I guess, to the non-commissioned officers and officers like myself and others to get us through those hump periods, if you will. I think the mindset of any soldier that's going to go into to any kind of war, whether it's the one we had or the one in Iraq, is one of, I want to do this thing and I will do this thing, but the mindset, if you will, comes later when you become part of an entity, when you have what we call in today's Army the battle buddies. Then the mindset sets in that you're not fighting really a war for democracy or a war for freedom, but you're fighting for the guy next to you. The guy next to you is what counts. So that when that mindset sets in, then I think the war becomes more important, and in fact gives you more of an incentive to want to be with the guys you're with or the gals you're with if you're in a unit that has both men and women. So the mindset that I found that was most interesting and that was most challenging to me was to foster the idea that we are a unit, and you're not going to let the guy down in back of you or in front of you. And so the battle buddy mindset is how I would answer your question.
And kind of tell me about the camaraderie among the troops. I mean, I hear there's a lot of bonds formed in combat or in the military. Is that true?
Yes, it's very true. And I think, oddly enough, and when I say this, I have to add a caveat. I'm not trying to boast or gloss over the significance of war, but going to Vietnam for me, and I think perhaps a lot of other people, I can only speak for myself, was the best thing I did in terms of being a military man, if you will, because it was what I had fought, or what I had trained for rather, and what I was there to do. And so that was the best time of my life, even though I sustained some injuries and that sort of thing. I still think it was the best time of my life in terms of being a soldier. And as I look back on my 26 years of military duty, I don't think I was ever better than when I was a soldier.
How much, as an officer, how much information at any given time did you have of particular battles or campaigns in Vietnam? You know, we hear some of the caisson and some of the all these different words and terms. I mean, how aware were you of the things that were going on around that country?
Well, we were very aware because, first of all, even back in the days of Vietnam, it was still pretty much instant communication. We had the Stars and Stripes newspaper, we had radio, armed forces radio and television, we had telephone calls home. We were very much aware of what was going on in other parts of Vietnam. And so at any given time, you knew what was happening. Of course, if you had heard of battles prior to Vietnam, and if you'd known anything about the French history in Vietnam and so the other times when other forces were there, you had some sense of what was going on. But we were, I would say, very much aware all the time that I was there, the 2 tours I was there, of what was happening, in perhaps more so in Vietnam than even back in the States.
You know, I've interviewed well over 100 Vietnam veterans, if not 150. You know, there's many questions initially I had when I first started, you know, like were drugs used in Vietnam? Talk about, you know, the winning of the war, the politics, you know, this. I've heard so many things. But did you see drugs as a problem in and around anything that you were around? You know, you hear about the 60s and the drugs were in our country. I mean, was that a common problem?
Oh, yes. It was the GIs, particularly my first tour, where we had a lot of troops from various different backgrounds. We had a drug problem. In our mountaintop location, it wasn't quite as difficult to deal with because we were relatively isolated, but still it was a problem, and occasionally we had to bust some kids for it. I will say yes, but it was not a problem that the line units had, where you really had a lot of really serious drug problems, because drugs were easier to get, I think, down in the line units. But yes, it was a problem. It was never a problem for me that was out of control, because we had a smaller group. I had perhaps only 80 or 90 people that I was responsible for. But I would say probably out of those 80 or 90, we probably had, at the year I was in Vietnam, we probably had, I would say, 8 or 9 serious drug cases that required disciplinary action or referring the troops down to the Long Binh jail or whatever the case would be.
Did you ever have to assist with like medevacs or the wounded or the killed or anything like that?
Yes.
Give me some information.
On one occasion in Dalat, not on several occasions, we would go into hot LZs and evacuate dead and wounded. And as I mentioned earlier, prior to the start of the filming, the officers in our advisory team each drew what they call kicker assignments. We flew along and kicked out the loads as we went into hot LZ, and then we would help load the bodies on. We evacuated many dead and wounded GIs, as well as the roughs and puffs, which were the regional force and popular force of Vietnamese. On one occasion, I can remember we lifted out of a hot LZ, and I was sitting on the bodies of 8 RF and PF soldiers, and we were taking what we call zip fire underneath the Huey, and it was coming through the fuselage and hitting these dead bodies, and they were jumping. They were already, of course, dead, but they were jumping from the impact and, in fact, shielding us in the aircraft from that. But yes, we probably, I suspect I participated in 20 or 30 missions of airlift missions of medevac for troops.
Do you get to a point where, I don't like the word routine, but I mean, something like that, are you desensitized to a point to survive that? How does a young man, you know, deal with that? I mean, you're trained, is it on-the-job training, or, you know what I'm saying?
Training has a lot to do with it, but you have to live it once or twice. I think what happens then, it becomes more of a conditioned response. But no, I was certainly never never felt isolated or detached or removed from it. Each time was different. Each time it was, in fact, horrible. And each time it got harder and harder. A lot of people are able to shut down or compartmentalize. I guess I wasn't one of those who could do it. The memories of all that still lives pretty much with me. In fact, I don't like to hear the whoop, whoop, whoop anymore. I won't ride in a helicopter, as a matter of fact. I've had enough of that.
Now, that's interesting. The gentleman before, his name's Larry Joe Powell. He's a decorated Vietnam veteran, was in law enforcement for 30-some years. He told me when he hears that sound, it brought hope because they were coming to help. You know, now you're saying you don't care to hear that.
Well, no, I don't, because I wasn't on the ground where the helicopter was coming in. More often than not, I was in the bird that was coming down to assist and then taking the remnants out. So my feeling is, and then of course I had a couple of experiences. One of our birds was hit and we went down. Is that that was enough. But I understand what he's saying, because when you're on the ground from an infantryman's position, looking up, and the bird is coming in with resupplies or with more troops, of course I can understand where he's coming from.
Yeah. Well, as I'm talking to you, this is interesting. Did your men look up to you, the people that were around you? You know, you were captain and a major, you said. I mean, they're looking up to you for guidance, support? I mean, you had to put on a strong, you know what I'm saying?
Well, yes, they do. And they know very quickly if you can't handle the job. And if that happens, you have a serious problem. But yeah, they do. And they expect you to do everything that they're going to do. And if you're not a good leader, they know it in a hurry. When that happens, then there are a lot of other problems that go with it.
You saw that movie, We Were Soldiers Once and
Yes.
Young, or We Were Soldiers was the movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young was the book.
Yes.
But at that time, Colonel Moore, who became General
Right.
Moore, of course, Mel Gibson portrayed him in the movie, but he was the first one out, last one out off the field.
Right.
That Drain Valley incident. You know, he was out there with the troops, you know, and he seemed
Right.
like he really set a good precedent for what he did. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yes, I think so. There are two theories. When you're in the military and you're a company commander or a platoon leader or a section leader, what have you, the idea is to lead, but you can't always lead from the front. Sometimes you have to be farther back to see the big picture, but that doesn't mean you're still not a leader. There's going to come a time when you have to be at the front. And I've done that, I've been there and done that, and it's really the only way that I think probably you can show at some point that you can do it as well as the guys that you're going to give an order to. So you lead from the front sometimes, you lead from the rear sometimes. If you're a helicopter pilot, you're flying in and out of that situation and doing both. But at some point you have to be there with the guys or the women now that are part of your group.
Did you ever feel invincible during your service, where nothing could happen to you?
No,
You know?
no, never felt invincible. I always felt that I could buy it at any time, and the guys with me could buy it at any time. No, I never felt invincible. I never wanted to feel invincible, because I think once you feel invincible, you begin to take chances and you jeopardize yourself as well as the people you're with. No, I never felt that way. I felt tired, I felt dragged, I felt scared as hell, but I never felt like I was king of the mountain and I could do no wrong. Never.
You never felt bulletproof?
Never.
Okay. As far as combat, whether you're in it or not, you know, you were telling me you're around it and all that, but a lot of times I'll ask the question, you know, sometimes they'll tell me there's no fear during the combat, it's after the combat that the fear sets in. I mean,
Right.
the times that you might have experienced the fear, but how do you get through a tough situation like that? Is it your faith, your training? What is it?
You know, I'm not sure I know how to answer that, because once you're in that environment, some people have said the best thing to do is stop thinking. I'm not sure that's valid either. It's just a matter of going through the motions and doing what you were trained to do, and doing what you're expected to react to do. The main thing is to know that the people around you know what they're doing, and they in turn trust you enough to know, and that they'll trust you. But I think after the fact is when it sets in, the PSTD or the shakes or the quivers. But when you're involved, it's almost like being in another place looking down when you're doing it, but it's hard to describe. I'm not sure I've done a very good job with it.
Well, after the war is over, you come home and everything. At what point do you start thinking about Vietnam, or have you just put the memories out of your head all these years?
It took me about when after I came back from Vietnam. Unfortunately, a lot of us from Vietnam don't have pleasant memories coming back, because we were not very popular. I had ROTC duty at a school, University of Michigan, and experienced some very pointed anti-American, anti-war views. So it took me perhaps a little longer than most to get over it, because I was still on active duty, of course, when I came back, and didn't retire until '86. My last tour was '71. But it's something that I probably didn't get over until about maybe 10, 11, 12 years afterward. I can remember one time in Michigan sitting on the porch of my in-laws and hearing a 4th of July celebration going off. That was maybe 8 or 9 years after I was out, and the involuntary ducking that comes, and I thought, I've been out of this almost 10 years, but I still, it's kind of an involuntary. I don't even remember doing it then, but of course I recall it now.
What kind of work did you do after the war?
After?
Yeah, after you got out of the military, what kind of work did you do?
For a while I was in San Antonio after I retired. For a while, for about a year, I worked in what they called a Christian assistance ministry of a coalition of churches helping the homeless in San Antonio.
Right.
I later on, for several years, then was a teacher of English as a second language and GED down in the barrio in San Antonio.
Good for you.
I did not go into a second career that I had prior to entering. Before I came on active duty, I was in the advertising and corporate marketing and public relations business, but I just didn't do that much after I got out of the military.
So you have a family, wife, kids?
Yes, I have a wife here, and I have six grandchildren. Yes.
So were you married during Vietnam?
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
is that difficult on your wife back home?
I think it's more difficult on the children than the wife. Yes, I was able to make it home for my daughter's high school graduation, but I missed a lot of her senior year. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is difficult. It's very difficult, and I think even to this day the dependents, which is a classic military term for the people you leave behind, don't get the recognition they deserve, because they go through it as much, and you see it, of course, today with the families with the kids in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah.
Oh boy, I tell you.
Yeah,
Right.
it's very tough. It's hard.
By the way, just a side note, my film on Vietnam is being used by the Veterans Administration to help Vietnam vets suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders.
Good.
The head of the Vet Center in Washington, D.C. is a psychologist, and he saw the film and felt it had therapeutic value. So I'm proud of the fact that that's helping heal some of the emotional scars. Seems like when these combat vets hear other peers talking about what happened to them, they're feeling it's okay to start talking, because a lot of them haven't talked to.
Right. I
had one Vietnam vet tell me it's the guys that don't talk about it, they're going to crack up.
Uh-huh.
So, but anyways,
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're sharing here. Well, in society today, and that's why I produced my film, because I think it brings out a positive image of the Vietnam vet, but society today as a whole, when you say Vietnam, they think of bad things.
Yes.
And Korea was called the Forgotten War. Why do you think Vietnam's gotten a bad rap? I know that's kind of a loaded question.
I'm not sure I can answer that for you, because we went into it under probably less than ideal and less than truthful situations. I think perhaps one of the things that happened as the war evolved, people began to realize that the things that got us into the conflict weren't necessarily the things that we heard about from the administration at the time. The other thing I think that's happened is that the horrendous number of people who were killed, 58,000 plus killed, and I'm not sure even today of the number that were still walking wounded. And then we get into the business of, I think Vietnam is the first example of the War of Liberation or the Guerrilla War, or whatever you want to call it, where there is no clear-cut victory. We didn't have a victory parade down the streets of Saigon. Yes, we had a victory parade in New York, but it isn't a war that was won like we did in World War II and that the American public has been accustomed to. So when you add all these things up, I think that it was an unpopular war for those reasons. And Americans weren't really sure why we were in it and what we were supposed to be doing there, which ties back to your earlier question, what were some of the kids thinking about who were there, why were they there? And of course, a lot of them were drafted, and that didn't make them particularly happy, I don't believe, at that time.
Now, again, were you, your job description on that second tour when you went in and would take out the wounded or the dead, was that something that you were asked to do, you volunteered to do, or that was part of what you're supposed to do?
Well, it was part of the mission. You didn't have to do it all the time because that didn't occur all the time. You didn't necessarily have a resupply mission every day. So there were some times when it wasn't required, and sometimes it was required. But it was certainly, if you were involved in the work that was being done, it was something that you felt like you should be doing and had to do.
Yeah. And at the time, I mean, are you ever conscious of fighting for your country, these young men being wounded, killed, freedom? I mean, does any of that go through your mind, or is it just survival?
Well, I think survival is utmost in anybody's mind. I think, first of all, when you're placed in a situation, whether it's just going to work in the morning or flying in a helicopter or pounding the ground or whatever, I think survival is always the key. Fighting for the country, I revert back to one of Hemingway's books, I don't remember which one it was, where the people got up and talked about how great and glorious it was to fight for the country. I think that is something that most military people have in the back of their mind, and of course they want to do this for their country. But again, it's the idea that if you're there, involved on the ground or in the air or on the sea or what have you, it's the people you're with that really make the difference. It's what you're fighting for. And yes, the people you're with come from your country, so indirectly it is your country you are fighting for. But you're fighting for your country with people that are there with you. The dead and the deployed are the people that carry the load. And they're there, and the country is here, back here. And yes, you're fighting for it, and yes, you represent it. But I would have to be very candid with you. I can't recall the time that I ever said, or I ever heard anyone say to me, be it a general, a colonel, or what have you, now let's get out there and let's win this for for your country. I think that's an unspoken thing that's there, but I don't know that that's a key driving motivational force to take young men and push them into life-threatening situations. As paradoxical as that may sound.
No, I can understand that. So, are you mainly encountering the BC or the North Vietnamese?
Well, we dealt mostly with the Viet Cong. The NVA occasionally would waft into our province. We were in a province called Tuan Duc Province, the second time in Dalat. The first time we were in Tuan Duc Province. The second time we were in Dalat. The NVA weren't as prevalent there as in some parts, farther west and into Cambodia and the other areas there. Mostly we dealt with homegrown Viet Cong. An example of that would be one night we went to dinner in a hotel in Dalat, and the next day it turns out that one of the people that we apprehended and disposed of was the waiter at our dinner the night before. And he was if you will, a homegrown VC by night and a waiter by day.
I heard that's a common type thing. They're plowing the field during the day and they're shooting at you at night.
Yes, Yes.
And so there was
Yes.
a lot of uncertainty, like there is today.
Very much so, and of course you see that in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and it's a thing that's associated with the guerrilla warfare or the wars of liberation or the religious wars or whatever the term is. There are no people in uniform, particularly in the Viet Cong and the people that are fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Uniformed divisions or companies that you saw in World War II, or perhaps even with the Chinese and Korea, probably are a thing of the past.
And my question is, if that's effective today, why didn't the Germans and the Japanese and the Chinese do that? Why did they come or why didn't we do that? I mean, I can't understand why it's so different today. And what's the purpose of it?
Well, I think it's because warfare has evolved. Traditionally, from the time of our revolution, we fought in mass formations, which was a tradition that came from Europe. The Hessians, the Brits. It was mass warfare. You line troops up and beat a drum and for the most part, march mass formations into battle. And as warfare has evolved now and as political influences have grown and religious influences have grown, people have realized that, and starting perhaps with Mao's theory of guerrilla warfare, that the civilians are the fish that swim in the sea, and people that needn't be. The best way to win a war is not necessarily to put a massed army in the field. The people themselves swimming in the sea, perhaps willing to engage in a protracted guerrilla conflict, if you will, or a war of liberation, or whatever they choose to call it, can be more effective over a long period of time, unless they're contained and won over by means other than open conflict.
Sure. Have you ever been to the Vietnam Wall in Washington?
Yes,
DC?
I have.
Do you know any of the names on there, or what do you think?
I think I recall several that I've known. It's been a while since I've been there, but yes, I've seen them. And of course, I've known people who have been killed in Vietnam, and it's been so long now that I'm not sure that I can recall all of the names that are there. But yes, I've seen it.
Was it an emotional time for you? What do you remember feeling when you went?
Very, very much so. Very, very much that way. And then after that, I had occasion to visit the World War II Memorial, which is, of course, much grander and more spread out. But I think there's something about the Vietnam Wall that speaks to those of us who were there, into itself kind of a more compact thing that's very moving.
I talk to kids in schools about the history of war, and I bring veterans with me at times from the local area, and I show a portion of my films, and it really gets their attention. And then so the door's open for the veterans to talk. But one of the things I challenge our younger generation with is, the fact that they're born in a free country. They really don't know what it is to not be free because they've always had this thing.
Right.
Do you ever give thought to the fact that this has been protected? People have fought for it, been wounded, been killed. And then I kind of just leave that as a thought provoker. But I'm going to ask you though, Mike, what does freedom mean to you, and what does it mean that freedom is not free?
When you say freedom is not free, well, freedom to me means that we have a life that we can pretty much lead the way we want to within the boundaries of a government that we have elected, and we can change if necessary. So freedom is something that, by our choosing, is what we want to do, and it's not free because too many people have paid too much for it, starting with the founding of course, our own country up through today. The word free, I think, is a total misnomer. It's free.
So?
Yeah, it's too much has been, the price has been too high to even consider I guess the term free kind of bothers me a little bit in the context that we're talking about.
about the American flag? What does it mean and represent to you as a veteran and as a citizen?
Well, it means everything to me that, it is my life. It's the life I've chosen as a citizen of this country, and it's worth protecting at any time and worth fighting for to preserve what we have.
As far as the war in Vietnam, I mean, I guess technically it was never a declared war like the Korean War. It was a police action, but for reference sake. But I've had some of the people I've interviewed tell me that we won the war. Congress lost the peace or something like that. You know, we won the war, and I'm not at all trying to get into the political ramifications, but you know, as an officer, I mean, you had a job to do, and you did it, right? I mean, is that pretty much it?
Well, yes. I feel like it was terribly frustrating to be there and then come back and see that nothing really changed. It was a war that we didn't win, and it was a war that we didn't lose. So in between the two, there's a question mark, and it's hard to pin down. You know, you talk about, again, we alluded to, or talked about the term victory. Well, there really wasn't a victory per se, and we certainly didn't lose, obviously, and that's not the issue. So it becomes a you do the job, and I'm proud of the job we did, and but again, it's a question of where does it fit, you know, in the history of things, in the context of where we are today in our country. Yeah. I wish sometimes that I could have been in a war that my uncle was in World War II, who had the victory parade and didn't come back to the kind of abuse that we did in Vietnam, as the Vietnam vets. I'm glad to see the kids today and coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq are getting the thanks they deserve. And it still bothers me today that a lot of us in Vietnam didn't get that in a war that we paid a very high price for.
I know a lot of the vets I've talked to are still kind of bitter about the homecoming, the whole bit, and
yes,
the way they were treated, and the fact that we are welcoming our troops home now. We've learned that, but what should our country remember about the Vietnam War, Mike?
I think we should remember that before we go to war, we should know exactly what it is we want to accomplish. And if we're going to go, and I think that most of the wars now that we will be fighting, Vietnam was the start. Now we have Iraq, and now we have Afghanistan. We have a whole new theater, if you will. And before we declare our presence in any of it, we ought to know what it is that we want out of the war. And I think the term, well, we want to win the war, is something that we need to look at very hard now, because if we're going to go into war to win it, the term win is pretty nebulous. We need to figure out what it is we're winning versus what it is we're going to get out of it in the long haul for this country and the people that believe in what this country believes. So we need to think long and hard about the new kind of war that had probably began mostly with Vietnam and is evolving today into Iraq and Afghanistan, as I see will probably be next in Africa, and it'll be much the same way.
Yeah. So what do you do to keep busy these days? What are you doing?
Well, believe it or not, I'm writing a novel about the Vietnam War that John Steinbeck encouraged me to write, and it's been rejected so far. And I'm also writing a war about terror. Can
I ask you about, you wanted to share a story about on the phone with me about Steinbeck's son, or tell me the story again?
Oh,
was he in your unit or something?
Yes, John was our newscaster in the Armed Forces Radio and Television Station in Pleiku. John was our newscaster, and then of course John the Elder came over to be with us and spent about a week. He was there when our TV station went on the air in January of 1967, and one night we had an alert, and I had the two Steinbecks, and of course the senior Steinbeck was in my charge, and I was very concerned about what might happen to him, because he took me aside and he said, look, he said, I'm a correspondent and I'm not supposed to be armed, but I want to tell you I've got my little pistol here, and Bob McNamara told me I could have it. And I said, John, what's going to happen tonight if we get overrun? And he said, don't worry about it. He said, if things get real bad, he said, I'll save 2 bullets, I'll shoot you with one and I'll shoot myself with the other. That'll be the end of it. But that didn't happen. But he wrote a column in Newsday about his son being 20, 30 feet below him in a foxhole, and then John, the father, being 20 feet above him on this night of this alert. And it was very interesting, a very interesting time we had with him. He was a delightful guy, and he encouraged me to start to write some about what happened in Vietnam.
You know, it interests me because I've spoke with corpsmen, medics, ministers, priests, chaplains, rabbis. So there's a spiritual side of combat and warfare. You know, I remember a Navy corpsman on Iwo Jima telling me that, you know, the men he treated, some died died peacefully, some died violently, and I don't know why, but I'm interested in that. It's just life and death, I guess. You know how it defines. To me, death brings out the reality of life. It's like, but even the experiences you had, I mean, did you have opportunities to talk to anybody, or were you just basically putting them in the helicopter, whatever you did with them, or did you have any contact or close contact with the wounded, or, I mean?
Yes, on occasions I did, and
words of encouragement. I mean, of just.
Well, yes, mostly it was telling them to hang on. I don't recall that we ever got into discussions about the Creator or God or religion, but mostly hang on. We'll get through this. We had a chaplain with our advisory team, and I can remember we had long discussions about this. I never was present at too many of the times when he was with them. It was always, we were separated. I think the hardest thing to see is a young man getting hit and screaming for his mother. And I know that's a cliche today, and that a lot of people say, well, that doesn't really happen, but it does happen. And I can recall hearing that happen and saying the term that always I remember is, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? My God, what's going to happen to me? I remember hearing a young man say that, and then I remember a young man saying, I want my mother, you know, a 19-year-old kid. The spirituality of war is something that you can't get away from, and it certainly is something that I think most of us have in one degree or another. I don't know that in the context of dealing with it on a one-to-one basis, you know, when you're seeing blood and gore and all that business, that it's something that we ever talked about right then. It would come later, I think. I think later. Mostly, I think it was a case of hanging on, let's get through this, and that kind of thing.
Did you ever question why you're there, or did you ever lose sight of the purpose of our troops being over there? I mean, is that a valid question? You know, why were we in Vietnam?
I think it's a valid question. I don't think that personally I ever asked that question in terms of why am I here. A lot of times I have said, why did this happen to this young man, or why did this happen to this unit, or why did this happen to me? But I can't think of a time when I really said, you know, why am I here? Why me? Because I made a conscious decision to come back and you know, wear the green suit. So I can't say that was really an issue for me personally. That, you know, sure, a lot of time we would question, what's this all about? But never, not to the extent I think that the way you're asking the question.
Well, I know, like in Korea, we're stopping communism.
Right.
I guess that's why we're in Vietnam too. The spread of communism,
Yeah.
and the decisions that were made. And again, I don't get into the politics of war. I had one lieutenant from a recon platoon tell me he was there to do a job. He said politics had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case probably for you and a lot of other guys.
That pretty well sums it up. Again, I can't remember ever being around people say, well, tomorrow we're going to do this operation because we're going to stop communism in Vietnam. Or tomorrow we're going to do this patrol because it's in defense of the United States of America. And again, I don't want to make light of this. That's not the issue. I think that the Marine lieutenant's view is pretty solid. You're over there to do a job, stopping communism before it gets to America, and those kind of slogans that would crop up. You see it or hear it occasionally, particularly from touring politicians. I think I know it never soaked in with me, and I can't remember anybody ever saying, well, we've got to stop the bastards, before they're in the streets of Los Angeles. Something like that in Vietnam never occurred to me. The political aspect of it just wasn't there for me, at least, and nor was it there for anyone I can think of, as I'm sitting here.
Mike, are you proud that you're a Vietnam veteran?
I'm very proud. I'm proud, and I'm proud that as I said earlier, I don't think I was ever better than when I was a soldier, and when I was in Vietnam, I think I was the best soldier I ever was, twice, and I say that for a number of other people who I was with and served with. Yes.
Have people thanked you for your service?
Interesting you should ask that question. I've had more people in the last 6 months here in Brenham thank me for my service than I've ever had in the entire rest of the time of my military career.
What's made the difference?
I think the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, where the troops coming home now are being thanked, and in turn now people are turning to graybeards like us and saying, oh, you were there too, weren't you? I say, yeah, we're in Vietnam. I said, well, thank you. And I've had a number of Iraq kids that I've talked to say thanks for it.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel much better because I think for too long those of us who were there felt like we weren't appreciated for what we had done, for the price we paid. It was particularly evident for me on the, as I mentioned earlier, on the college campus I was on. That was a couple of times very difficult to take.
We're doing good here. I think we're about done, unless there's something else maybe you were thinking about telling me about your experience. I could probably sit here longer, but I think we've done pretty good.
I can't think of anything else. I'm glad to have the opportunity to vent with you a bit here, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. I think just one follow-up question, the importance of recording the history of the World War II veterans, Korea, Vietnam, even those today. How important is it that we do this and share this with our younger generation?
I think it's terribly important. I think if we don't, we'll lose that generation. I already have talked to kids in high schools here today, and even in one case grade schools, and they just don't know. And they just don't know. And if they don't know, I don't know what will happen if there comes a time when they in turn will be asked to step up like we have. If they don't know, I'm not so sure they will step up. They have to know. You have to see what you're doing and people like you are doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. At the end of my interviews, Mike, I always, if you see one of my films, you'll understand why I do this, but I ask the veterans to salute into the camera. Can you do that when I ask you from where you're seated?
Sure.
Could you do that for me?
Stand up or sit?
No, with the camera being at this level, I understand why you'd want to stand, but go ahead, sir. Look right into the camera.
Okay.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay.